Hello, I'm Paul Beckwith, and in recent videos I've talked about how climate is impacting human systems, how climate is impacting inflation, for example. It's making things more expensive for us, most notably food, but also the general consumer price index. I've also talked about how extreme weather events and heat waves and droughts and climate change in general, all of the weather weirding, weather wilding, weather whiplashing is doing a number on our infrastructure around the world. You know, we're having cities that are submerged with water. We're having buildings and structures destroyed by massive typhoons or cyclones, hurricanes. Tornadoes are impacting us, hailstorms, all of these different things are all contributing to causing damage to infrastructure, to houses, to roads, to electrical grid systems, and so on. So I just finished reading this fascinating book. It's called How Infrastructure Works Inside the Systems That Shape Our World. It was published in 2023. It was named a best book of 2023 by Publishers Weekly and some other book reviewers. And I just want to talk a little bit about this book and about how climate change is actually hammering infrastructure, how we need to be more resilient. We need to make sure our infrastructure is in tip-top shape. So when it's impacted by an extreme weather event or something, for example, that it's we can get things working again quickly. I mean, we don't think about infrastructure much at all, but when you think about it, think about what you did today. You know, you may have been in a car on a road, you may have taken public transit, you probably went and if you made your supper, you bought everything at grocery stores, probably didn't grow your own food. So think of the supply chains involved. Think of how goods are transported. We're very dependent on goods that we get from around the world. You know, you might have boiled a kettle, so we need the electrical grid. You got water to put in your kettle from the water pipes, the grid. You put your waste in garbage containers or in recycling containers, which then need to be picked up. And think of all the dependence of our lives on systems that when they work, we don't think about them at all. But the problem is that climate disruption is starting to take out systems. Think of the hurricane that went through Puerto Rico and knocked out the power grid, and the power was out for almost a year. Think of some of the extreme weather events that have taken out power grids in California and Texas. Think about the high winds that knocked over transmission lines that were live in California, causing sparks, causing massive wildfires, which then burned down the town of Paradise, California, a few years ago. The climate migrants, if you like, people that are forced to move because of climate change through no choice of their own. Anyway, let's talk about the infrastructure in this book. So it's a great book. I'll just read the little dust cover here. So this book is a new way of seeing the essential systems hidden inside our walls, under our streets, and all around us. So infrastructure is a marvel. It meets basic needs and enables lives of astounding ease and freedom that would have been unimaginable just a century ago. Its many interconnected systems comprise the most vast and complex technological structures ever created by humans. It's also a physical manifestation of the social contract of our ability to work together for collective benefit. A soaring bridge is a feat of engineering, but so are the networks of reservoirs, transformers, roads, sewers, cables, and pipes that deliver water, energy, and information to where we need them. So engineering professor Deb Chachra takes readers on a fascinating tour of these essential utilities, revealing how they came to be, so the history and development of them over time, why they work the way they do, which is the physical principles, the physics behind the engineering constructions, and just how much we rely on them. So we totally rely on them. We got a taste of this, during the pandemic when we were confined at home, about how important these systems were. For most of us, these systems hang in plain sight unless they stop working. And actually, they're stopping working more and more often because of abrupt climate system change. When they begin to break down because of systemic neglect and underinvestment, or the increasing impact of climate change, their limitations become impossible to ignore. Even infrastructural systems that were built to serve the public good often distribute harms like pollution, inequitability. Although everyone is affected when they fail, those with the fewest resources suffer the most. So when they fail, there's unequal suffering. Chachra maps out a path for transforming our shared infrastructure to be not just functional, but also equitable, resilient, and sustainable. If the cost of not being able to rely on these life-enabling systems is unimaginably high, so too are the rewards of learning to see them and to rethink and rebuild them together. So there's an entire chapter in this book on climate change, how it's hammering infrastructure and disrupting infrastructure. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the things that are discussed in this book. Okay, so this is the Amazon site. Lots of people have really, really good comments on this book. I love the book. I thought it was very good. Revelatory, superbly written, pulsing with wisdom and humanity. How Infrastructure Works is a masterpiece. It gives you a new way of seeing the essential systems hidden inside our walls, under our streets, and all around us. So infrastructure, it is truly a marvel. It meets our basic needs. It enables lives of astounding ease and productivity that would have been unimaginable just a century ago. So a century ago, right, or even longer, people couldn't rely on all these systems. So a lot of their lives were just going about day-to-day stuff and surviving. They weren't able to be that productive because they had to do all of these things themselves at home, which we take for granted. So basically with our infrastructure today, it's almost like we're like kings of old, if you like. It's a physical manifestation of our social contract, of our ability to work collectively for the public good. It consists of the most complex and vast technological systems ever created by humans. Okay, so this is basically, what I just read you of the cover. So I highly recommend this book. Now let's look at some of the things that are discussed within, but before then, this is the, I had a look at, to get a bunch of articles. I went on Google, looked at climate change and infrastructure, and I picked out some articles by various places on infrastructure and how it's being affected by climate and what we can do about hardening and reinforcing infrastructure. So this is the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, which has an article called Climate Change Impacts on the Built Environment. And it talks about, the bridges, buildings, roads, bridges, parks, streets, and systems. These are all systems that provide transportation, water, power, etc. About 85% of Americans live in metropolitan areas. That number is projected to grow over the next little while. We're getting more and more intense single-day rainstorms that increase the risk of urban flooding, especially in areas with a lot of paved surfaces where, which don't let the water run through into the soils. There's urban heat islands in cities, right? And cities are sort of leading the fight to adapt to climate change. So many cities are planting more trees or installing green roofs, adding green spaces, trying to improve air quality and cooling urban areas, having more permeable ground to absorb rainfall, reduce runoff and flooding, etc. Because, basically the greenhouse gas emissions are increasing at ever greater rates. Greenhouse gases in the atmosphere are much larger. So we're having all of these impacts. So the top climate impacts on the built infrastructure: damaged or stressed infrastructure. So a lot of US infrastructure is nearing the end of its life. This aging infrastructure is threatened by extreme weather events, which are already becoming more frequent and more intense. So in coastal regions, high tide flooding has harmed or destroyed infrastructure and private property. In the West, wildfires are damaging property, affecting air quality. Floodplains, we're getting extreme precipitation, causing dam failures, bridge washouts, and road closures. Many cities have outdated or aging sewer systems that intense rainfall can overwhelm, causing untreated wastewater to flow into local water bodies. Many older cities have the stormwater becomes part of the wastewater. It's not a separate system. So if the stormwater, when there's a storm, all that stormwater can go into the sewer system and cause untreated sewage to go into rivers, etc., whenever there's a massive storm. So many cities are now having a separate storm sewer system, and sewage system. Of course, extreme temperatures are stressing the whole system, the US energy system. Failing cooling systems can lead to high indoor temperatures, endangering workers' health, reducing productivity. Of course, transportation systems are vulnerable to climate stressors like extreme temperatures and heavy precipitation. Flooding can cause billions of dollars of damage to transportation infrastructure, right? We're getting billion-dollar disaster events in the US every 18 days. Right? We're getting them a lot more frequent than we used to. Of course, all this extreme weather event and destruction of infrastructure, it impacts the production and distribution of goods and services. Right? There's things like essential services like telecommunications, energy, water, healthcare, and transportation. They can all be affected. We're in a highly networked world. So in Houston, when Hurricane Harvey hit in 2017, 300,000 people without power. The storm affected emergency services, hospitals, and water treatment plants. We're having threats to quality of life and to human health. Urban areas are very important. There's more and more migration of people within countries into urban areas. Okay, so there's a lot of different things in here. And this is again from the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. Okay, let's go back here. Okay, so that's the EPA. It's time to stop building infrastructure for yesterday's climate. This is an article by the Canadian Climate Institute. They say that Canada's infrastructure isn't prepared for the climate crisis impacts. And, spring used to be the best time of year, bringing both light and lightness as the winter receded, but it's ushering in a lot of, climate change. There's lots of spring and then summer floods, wildfires, heat waves, followed by a stormy fall. So people aren't looking forward to this season so much because of the, what's happening. There's already severe impacts from climate change. We know it's going to get worse in the future. So it's important to have resilience in our systems, in our buildings, in our infrastructure, to protect communities. and provide the services that the infrastructure does. So infrastructure is becoming exposed as a huge vulnerability to climate change. How infrastructure defines our climate is a crucial part of the fight against climate change and global warming is often overlooked, the role of infrastructure. There's another article on how infrastructure is one of the greatest influencers of climate change and the effects of climate change. Right, we're talking about power plants, residential buildings, commercial buildings. They account for about 1/3 of global emissions. So not only if infrastructure is not done properly, it exacerbates climate change. And okay, so that's another article. And I'll just show you a few more. This is the EPA, climate change impacts on transportation, like the infrastructure, like the airports, train stations, roads, bridges, pipelines, and bike trails, the vehicles, like cars, buses, trucks, trains, ships, and aircraft, and people, including equipment operators, designers, builders, and transportation officials. Okay, so more than 60,000 miles of U.S. roads and bridges in coastal areas are at risk of flooding and damage from climate change-related sea level rise. And there's lots of other different sections on the top climate impacts on transportation, the impacts on system safety and function, system costs to the economy. When transportation systems are cut, then it's impossible to ship goods. There's scarcity of food, for example, scarcity of items in grocery stores, and it's a big enabler and increaser of inflation. Inflation was talked about a lot in the recent presidential debate, but, fingers are pointed, oh, it's the incumbent's fault, etc. Well, no, as I've shown, climate change is having a big impact on inflation. In fact, the central banks aim for 2%, and about half of that, 1%, can be just due to climate change alone, as I pointed out in my previous video. Okay, so transportation is critical to the well-being in the economy and everything else. There's the UN climate change adaptation groups talk about climate resilient infrastructure, what we can do, different projects to reinforce coastlines, different projects to try to harden infrastructure and make it more resilient. Part of the problem is we've been in a society that's looked at optimization of making things as cheaply as possible, or as cost with low cost, as low a cost as possible. And but the problem is you don't have any redundancy when you do systems like that. And that's a problem because you lose resilience. So if you want to optimize, if you're designing an engineering process to build infrastructure is for optimization, lowest cost, then you lose the redundancy, and therefore those systems are very brittle. They're not resilient to things like climate change at all. And this is the Government of Canada, Code Standards and Guidance for Climate Resilience. So lots of people are thinking about, how to harden systems, different codes, building codes to make things more resilient. Climate Resilient Built Environment Initiative, 2021 to 2028, 7-year initiative led by the National Research Council to harden and make public infrastructure more resilient. Okay, so there's a whole section there. And this is Engineers Canada, preparing for the impact of climate change, the importance of improving infrastructure, climate resiliency, the engineering perspective. Okay, so there's lots of different groups. This is Engineers Canada. It's a national organization of Canada, 290,000 members of the engineering profession, and what they can do to incorporate the knowledge of changing climate and extreme weather events into constructing things in Canada, basically. Okay, so there's lots of good stuff in here. And let's go back to the what some of the things that are in the book, actually. Okay, so this is the author, Deb Chachra. Interestingly, she, you know, this is just, I Googled her name, and there she is. And there's a Wikipedia page on her. So she's a material scientist. She's now a professor of engineering at Olin College, teaching about infrastructure. Interestingly, she grew up near me. She grew up in Scarborough, Ontario. I grew up in Oakville, Ontario. She talks in the book about visiting the Pickering nuclear power plant to see, you know, how it operated, and it was always there. They'd walk down to the beach from her house along a road, and they'd see the big cooling towers and structures, enclosed structures of the Pickering nuclear plant. And, you know, it got her really interested in engineering, you know, and how things worked and so on. So she's now, she did her PhD, Department of Materials at University of Toronto. And she joined MIT, and then is teaching. She's contributed to the Atlantic, and you know, has won various awards. And anyway, she's written this excellent book. So this is one of the places that she describes in the book, which is kind of an elegant engineering solution to a problem that occurred during, you know, pre-internet, really. In the UK, people loved their football matches, so you'd have most of the country watching football, which we call soccer in North America. And after a goal, there'd be an intermission, and everybody in the country would go and put the kettle on and boil some water for a cup of tea. And that caused a huge spike in power loads, which often threatened to cause the electrical grid in the UK to go into brownout mode or even blackout mode, because with electricity, the supply has to be able to be adjusted quickly to match the demand. So this is a pumped hydro project in Wales. Okay, so it's an energy storage scheme. It's in North Wales. It uses abandoned slate quarries as reservoirs for water. And there's a quarry, there's two reservoirs, one at the low level and one at the high level, and the distance between them is about 500 meters or half a kilometer. So what they do is during idle times, when more power is being generated than needed, it runs these pumps, 6 turbine pumps, to pump water from the lower reservoir to the upper reservoir. During times like in the football match, when everybody goes to put the kettle on and there's a spike in power demand, the operator in the site will be watching the football game, or would have, and he'll go and press a button, and that lets water fall quickly from the upper reservoir to the lower reservoir, generating 99.9 megawatts of power. It has 700 megawatt hours storage capacity when the upper reservoir is full. So dividing these two numbers, you could get 100 megawatts essentially of power for 7 hours. The volume is 1.3 million cubic meters at 250 meters of head. It's got, and it can start to full power in 12 seconds. It's got an efficiency of 81%. So it's like a battery with an efficiency of 81%, right? There are some losses, but you know, so in other words, the energy that you use from the grid during, like at night or during times when demand is low, pump the water up to the top, and you can recover about 81% of that energy. There's actually 6 turbines now in the book. It's, you know, and the thing just works for a long period of time, right? So this is a site. This is a very elegant site. And recently I did a video because I visited Marmora, Ontario, and they were talking about doing a pumped storage site at that location, but that never happened, or at least hasn't yet. But it's ideal for renewable energies when you have solar and wind, because it can act as a huge battery. So this is a power station in Wales, the Dinorwig power station. They call it locally Electric Mountain, right? So it's a pump storage hydroelectric scheme, and it can supply a maximum power of 1,728 megawatts. So that's actually more than the previous, this says 99.9 megawatts. This is like this shows more. And it was basically, it provides peak capacity. You can ramp it up very, very quickly in seconds. And it's we do this a lot now with natural gas power plants. But if you have the infrastructure or a location where you can do this idea is very, very it's an excellent way of doing it. So construction began, and here's where it is, in Wales, okay, northern Wales. It took 10 years to build. Construction began in 1974. It was done in 1984. And it's got 6 300 megawatt turbines, 400,000 horsepower. And the nice thing is that, so there's a vertical pipe, and when you apply electricity to the turbines, they're like electrical pumps. And when the water is falling down and you're extracting power from the battery, if you like, then these turbines are electrical generators. So it's a very elegant, large-scale project, which is excellent if you've got the geography to do it. Another project talked about in the book, infrastructure project, is the Thames Barrier, right? I've talked about the Thames Barrier before. So it's a retractable barrier system. It's built to protect the floodplain of Greater London from exceptionally high tides and storm surges moving up from the North Sea. So it became operational in 1982, and when needed, it's closed or raised during high tide. The barrier is raised. At low tide, it can be opened to restore the river's flow towards the sea. Okay, so these are the big, huge buckets which can create dams, etc. So flooding in London has been a problem since Roman times. There was a serious North Sea flood in 1953 that affected the Thames estuary and parts of London, and they started to get worried about it, and they built this system, this dam. So it protects central London against storm surges. Here is a different, it's like clamshells. So here's when it's open, and when it's closing, it comes like this, and when it's completely closed, it's like this. So it's a barrier to the water coming in. Okay, so it's a huge project. It's a huge barrier. Now, how often does it have to be used? So this is closures per season, and starting in 82, 83, okay, for tidal reasons and for, extensive rain event reasons. Okay, so it was used once in 82, 83, once in 85, 86. So, it wasn't on very often. And then 4 uses here, 4, 7, 4. Look at the numbers have gone up. Look at 2000, 2001. 24 times it was needed, 20 times here, right? Look at this, 2013, 2014, 50 times it was used. Right? So basically it's needed more and more often as sea level rises and as we get extreme weather events. Okay, so it's, the climate is changing, and this thing is being used more and more often to protect London from flooding. Okay, so that's mentioned and discussed in the book. The Hoover Dam is in there. You know, spectacular dam. I've been fortunate enough to see the Hoover Dam. It's near Las Vegas. It's a concrete arch gravity dam in the Black Canyon of the Colorado River on the border between Nevada and Arizona. It was constructed during the Great Depression between 1931 and 1936 to get people out of the Great Depression, give them jobs. It's a Franklin D. Roosevelt project, and it's basically for hydroelectric generation and for control, and it basically impounds Lake Mead is behind it. Okay, so this is you know, it's a fantastic engineering project. So this is some of the things about the dam here, some of the stats. Height 221.4 meters or 726 feet. Length about not quite a quarter of a mile. And so it's a huge project, right? So it created the reservoir of Lake Mead, and if you've been following the weather patterns in those regions, there's drier and drier conditions. So the Lake Mead has hit record lows, even threatening to go below the water intake when you wouldn't be able to generate any more electrical power. Okay, so it generates lots of energy and lots of turbines. Okay, but you know, here's an image of it. So Mead Lake and the dam, and the water levels. You can see the water levels in this picture would be up to here before, and so they're much below. You know, the drought we're getting many years has lowered the level, and there's also silting up, so there's a limited lifetime to this project. But this is an example of huge infrastructure that's in the book there. Mad Max Fury Road is mentioned in the book. This is a 2015 Australian post-apocalyptic action film. And the reason why it's in there is because it's in there during a discussion on water infrastructure, because of course people need water to survive. So in this dystopian future movie, one of the protagonists had sort of his hangout headquarters was over over groundwater, which could be accessed by pumps. So he controlled the water flow to the public, and the public is one scene where the public are all, dying of lack of water, and he's up at the top of this tower, and he opens the pipes and lets water fall on all these people. He controls them because he's the one who controls the access. It's Immortan Joe, this guy, Immortan Joe. He's the main antagonist in the 2015 film. Okay, in control of the water. So it's mentioned in the book. Other popular culture is mentioned there. Now, container ships, how they revolutionized the transportation industry is quite an interesting story. So there's these containers became standardized, and cranes would just lift them onto ships. So manufacturers would create their product and pack it in shipping containers with a GPS tracker on them. These containers would be stacked onto trucks or onto rail and brought to container ports, where they could be loaded onto ships by crane. They go to their destination, and then they're loaded off by crane, going right to the final customer, where they're unpacked. So this whole thing became standardized and greatly lowered the cost of transportation of goods, shipping goods around the world. There's these crates. These cartons are called 20-foot equivalent units, the big shipping containers. And the largest modern ships carry over 20,000 of these things now. Like, it's just, the ships have got bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, so this is the 10th biggest, and this is the number of containers that can go be on the ship. And let's go right to the end here to number 1. So here's number 1, the MSC Irina class. It can hold 24,346 of these 20-foot equivalent units, which are the shipping containers. It's the largest class. The Irina class is the largest class of container ships in the world. There's 4 ships operated by MSC between Europe, the company, I guess, between Europe and East Asia. It's 400 meters long. That's 1,312 feet long. It's unbelievably huge. That's about a quarter of a mile. 61.3 meters or 200 feet wide. 233,328 gross tons. And like I said, it can carry 24,346 of these shipping containers. And if you go to the next one, it's almost the same size. Okay, here's another one. Okay, so we've got these ships plying the world with these massive containers. And this is a 20-foot equivalent unit. It's a 20-foot long, 6.1 meter container. So this is 1 TEU. And they also now have 40-foot containers. So here's 2 of the TEU containers and next to each other, and there's a 40-footer sitting on top. So this whole thing would be 6 TEU, right? So that's sort of the invention, or the development and standardization of the shipping industry using these shipping containers. It revolutionized the world. It greatly decreased the costs of transportation of shipping goods around the planet. Okay, so basically, you know, it changed the shipping of goods around the planet. Bridges, of course, bridges are getting longer and bigger and higher capacity. Here's the 10 longest bridges on the earth. In China, this guy here, it's got the record for the world's longest bridge ever since it was built in 2011. It's 102 miles long, this bridge. Right? Runs between Shanghai and Nanjing. It carries a high-speed railway. Okay, and it took 4 years to build, cost about 8.5 to 10 billion, needed 10,000 people to get built. Okay, so this bridge is just incredibly long, and there's other bridges and viaducts, so it's listing all of the different structures. Most of them are in China. This one's in Thailand. You know, here's a US bridge, but most of them are China. Okay, so massive infrastructure projects like that are very important for society. Also, another area of infrastructure, you know, another thing that revolutionized our modern world is the global positioning systems on satellites, right? Global positioning systems, it used to be, the GPS system was originally called Navstar GPS, satellite-based radio navigation system. It was owned by the US government and operated by the Air Force, the United States Space Force. It's a global navigation system that provides geolocation and time information to a GPS receiver anywhere on or near the Earth, where there's an unobstructed line of sight to 4 or more GPS satellites. So 3 gives you three lets you triangulate to the surface of the Earth, and the fourth one gives you the altitude. Okay, and basically it was scrambled the signal initially so that it was only good to, I don't know, 10 feet, 50 feet, whatever, but it's got a capability of locating your location to within millimeters on the surface of the Earth. So the GPS project was started by the U.S. Department of Defense in 1973. First prototype spacecraft launched in 78. They had a full constellation of 24 satellites. The system became operable in 1993. Now, Korean Airlines Flight 007 was shot down when it mistakenly entered Soviet airspace. So at that time, Reagan said the GPS system would be made available for civilian use as of September 16, 1983. Its accuracy was limited to about 100 meters or 330 feet because there was something called selective availability, which was a deliberate error introduced into the GPS data, which the military could correct for to have, much higher resolution. Okay, but now, it's the scrambling, the selective availability has been greatly reduced, so I think it's good to, very, very high accuracy. It says 30 centimeters or 12 inches here. They can, for land surveying and high end, they can get about 2 centimeter or 3/4 of an inch accuracy. It can even provide sub-millimeter accuracy with long-term measurements. Consumer devices like phones can be accurate to about 5 meters or better, right? So there's more and more satellites, and so this is a system that also revolutionized, our planet, our infrastructure, aircraft, people knowing exactly where they are for car GPSs, etc. And so this is another example of, a very important infrastructure system for our planet. And then also, I don't need to go into details of broadband and, telecommunications. Broadband or high speed, it's high bandwidth data transmission. Okay, it allows you to get very fast internet access. The transmission medium can be coax cable, optical fiber, wireless internet or radio, twisted pair cable, satellite. Okay, and it's becoming, a necessity, a requirement for people just about everywhere. Okay, so this is another piece of infrastructure that's kind of revolutionized the planet. So all of these things are discussed in this book, and of course, climate change is impacting everything. It's impacting all of our infrastructure. Our infrastructure is not in good shape in many places. So in the US, for example, I think there's a group, engineering group, that ranks how good infrastructure is, and I think it improved in the U.S. recently. It went from a grade of D, a failing grade of D, to a marginal pass of C+. But when we neglect our infrastructure, the maintenance of it, etc., it makes it much, much more vulnerable to shocks from extreme weather events, flooding. Think of, a city gets flooded. Think about all the pipes that are under the ground, and the electrical cables and the telecommunication cables and all the rest of it. I mean, infrastructure is getting hammered, as climate change worsens, and we can't ignore it. I mean, it's vital for our modern way of life. So anyway, it's a great read. I highly recommend it. Thanks for listening. Please go to my website, paulbeckwith.net, and donate to PayPal to support my research and videos. Thanks again. Bye for now.